honor, privilege, pleasure. Who's never heard Larry Hamm speak before? Raise your hand. Okay, you're in church for a reason. It is transformational. It's my honor, pleasure, and just really, I'm so heartwarmed that Larry agreed to come. We were at a rally. We were at the impeachment rally that Ron helped organize. A number of you were there, and I said, we have to get Larry to come to New Jersey, come to Piscataway. Then he announced he was running for Senate, and we were like, okay, now Larry has to come to Piscataway because he's got a real reason to tell everybody about why what he stands for, what he's fought for. If you want to see an authentic champion of human rights, civil rights, progress, someone who has been walking the walk, not just talking the talk, for 40 plus years, there's nobody better to talk about what threats we face and how we can overcome them together than Larry Hamm. Please give a warm Piscataway welcome to my friend Larry.
Good evening. Good evening. Very glad to be here. First of all, let us give a hand to the congregation of Zion Hill and their pastor for letting us meet here tonight, Dr. Leonard Hamm. There he is, right there. No, I don't need a podium. But thank you for the offer. I'm very glad to be here and to see all of you, people of Piscataway. I want to introduce my co-chair. I'm the state chair of Bernie Sanders' New Jersey campaign. And my co-chair is here, the real get-it-done guy, Barry Brendel. Give him a big hand. There he is right there. Came down with someone who has been working with me over the years and is now involved herself in my campaign for U.S. Senate. Like probably some of you in here, she is a district leader in the West Ward of Newark, Sheila Montague. Give her and I would be I would hurt myself if I left here without recognizing Stacey Gray. Give her a big hand.
There's so many Stacey's, it gets confusing. And Nikki's here, yay!
All right. And so I want to recognize everybody that's here tonight. And just seeing people here voting on stuff on a Sunday afternoon looked like a Norman Rockwell painting. It really did, the democracy, right? Like the real thing, like people in here at the grassroots level voting collectively, deciding what's going to happen in their communities. That's what's going to save America. That's what's going to save America, brothers and sisters. When we take a hold of this process, and one of the reasons we're in the shape we're in today, there are a lot of reasons, and we could prioritize them in different ways, but one of the reasons is that people have fallen away from the democratic process. And that falling away, in some ways, has been engineered, and in other ways has something to do with our culture and individualism, and just apathy. But the end result is that people are not involved in the democratic process. And when the grassroots people are not involved in the democratic process, that makes space for nefarious characters to come in and seize hold of the democratic process and use it for malevolent and selfish and greedy and hateful reasons. I was so sorry I didn't get here in time to buy a lottery ticket, a raffle ticket, so that I could win the Donald Trump toilet brush. But the good news is, a year ago, someone gave me, they had gone to France, and when they got back from France, they said, I have a gift for you. And they gave me a roll of Donald Trump toilet paper, and I'm proud to report it's all used up. Yes, so I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad we have a Piscataway progressive democratic organization, because we as progressives, active people who want to really achieve equality and justice and peace and prosperity for everybody and not just a few, we have to come together, because our vision for society is not going to be achieved by good wishes and by letters and by telephone calls alone. We have to unify, and we have to build a people's movement made up of everybody for the fundamental transformation of America. That is our task, and has been our task for more than half a century. We didn't get in this situation with Donald Trump. This situation was a long time coming. And you know, when you read the Old Testament, somewhere in the Old Testament, I remember there's a verse that says, line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little. And this has been building up over the years. It didn't begin with Donald Trump. It didn't begin with George Bush Jr. It didn't begin with Sr. It didn't begin with Clinton. It didn't begin with Ronald Reagan. Its roots go even deeper than that. I would say, if I had to point at the beginning of this phase, not the beginning, but the beginning of this phase, I probably would go back to 1968. I would go to 1968. I would go to 1968, the year that Martin Luther King and John Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy were assassinated. I mean, some of us might go back to 63. I mean, think about it. In a 5-year period, you had a whole group of major assassinations taking place in this country. The assassination of the president, the assassination of Malcolm X, the assassination of Medgar Evers, the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. King was assassinated in April of 1968. 3 months later, 3 months, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. Can you imagine that? In the same year? I don't know how many people in here remember Gil Noble, who did a TV show called Like It Is. He used to have me on his show fairly regularly. I would say 3 or 4 times a year I would be on Like It Is. And one time Gil told me, he said, Larry, I've been doing research, because you know Gil did his own documentary on Martin Luther King. And Gil told me that one of the things that he discovered, you know, Bobby Kennedy had announced that he was running for president. Gil told me that Bobby Kennedy was going to ask Martin Luther King to be his running mate in 1968. I mean, that's really something to consider, right? Can you imagine if they had not been assassinated? And if they had been elected, I'm pretty sure they would have been elected. And the difference that would have taken place, the different course that would put our country on. But they were assassinated. They didn't die in their sleep. They didn't die of cancer. They didn't have heart attacks and strokes. They had been declared enemies of the state, and they were assassinated. State power. Coretta Scott King, and you know, this is something, we just finishing up the King holiday, and we all love Dr. King. We all understand the depth of his sacrifice, but I have to say this, having been involved somewhat in the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King would not have been able to do what he did had it not been for Coretta Scott King, his wife. The civil rights movement would not have achieved what it did achieve had it not been for the women in the civil rights movement. So when we remember Martin Luther King, we must also remember Coretta Scott King. We must also remember Ella Baker. We must also remember Fannie Lou Hamer. We must also remember Diane Nash. We must also remember Viola Liuzzo, all the women in the civil rights movement. This is very important because if we don't, we get a one-sided history and, in essence, not the truth. Because as Hegel said, the truth is the whole. I'm so glad to be here. I'm so glad to see my friend Herb this here. He's active in my campaign. Give Herb a big hand. He's trying to, I like Herb. I haven't known Herb long, but for some reason, I just like Herb.
I like Herb too.
You like Herb too?
I do.
I like Herb.
I love Herb.
You love Herb? All right, then I'm on the right track. But I'm here today to talk about a couple of things. First of all, I want to talk about being the state chair for Bernie Sanders in New Jersey. And I know people were walking around, you know, when the debates first started, and people were walking around after the debate with long faces, and all these candidates were in the race, and they were talking so bad about Bernie Sanders, and then Bernie had a heart attack. You know, and people were kind of down, you know. But I'm glad to report that today, this day in Iowa, Bernie Sanders is leading in the polls in Iowa. And in this latest CNN poll that came out yesterday, he's leading in Iowa and leading in New Hampshire. And I believe that Bernie Sanders will win the Democratic Party nomination in this country. I believe that. And I'm just glad that we have a candidate like that. Let's see. I have seen 9 presidents since Eisenhower. I remember when I was at South 17th Street School and kids would come to school with buttons on that said, "I like Ike." See, some of us are old enough to remember that. And I saw Eisenhower, I saw Johnson. I saw Eisenhower, I saw Kennedy, I saw Johnson, I saw Nixon, I saw Jimmy Carter, I saw Ronald Reagan, I saw the first George Bush, then Bill Clinton, and the second George Bush. I supported Barack Obama, and he was elected in 2008, and I voted for Obama in 2012. But in 2016, I supported and was a delegate for Bernie Sanders to the Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia. And I supported Bernie Sanders in 2016 because I thought, I'm gonna tell you why I really supported Bernie Sanders, right? Because there's like the canned version, right? It's like, why really? You know why I really supported Bernie Sanders? Because he looked that television camera in the eye when millions of people were watching that first debate with Hillary Clinton, and he said, "We need a political revolution in America." That's why I supported Bernie Sanders. Because we're not just supporting Bernie because Bernie wants to tinker around the edges. Yes, he wants to do things and enact reforms that will improve people's lives. But he also understands that the problem is not just the healthcare system, the problem is not just the educational system, the problem is not just the military, it's the whole system that has to be changed. But there are some of these reforms that he's standing for, stood for in 16 and stands for today, that we absolutely need. 2 weeks ago, I had my second campaign meeting, and we were standing in the community center that's called Refile in Newark, and I fainted. Now you can imagine what I was thinking, how this was going to play with the campaign, right? But I fainted. I'm 66 years old. I had never fainted in my life. But that morning, I had gone out jogging, and I jogged 8 miles that morning, and I didn't eat anything. I didn't eat anything, and I didn't drink anything, and I went to the meeting to chair the meeting, and before I knew, I don't even remember falling down. All I remember was opening my eyes, and everybody was looking at me, standing over looking at me. They called the ambulance. The ambulance came and took me to what used to be called the University of Medicine and Dentistry. Now it's called Rutgers University Hospital. They took me to Rutgers University Hospital. So I'm in the emergency section. And you know, they have the little stalls that they put you in when you're in the emergency section. You don't have them when you need stalls. And I'm laying there, right? I'm waiting for the EMT to come in. I'm waiting for the doctor to come in. No, not yet. I'm waiting for the nurse to come in. No, not yet. A lady comes in, a hospital administrator. Before the doctor, before the nurse, before the EMT, the hospital administrator comes in and said, Mr. Hamm, Ron, do you have your insurance card? They were telling me that no matter what my situation was, that all of that was precluded by having an insurance card. And I was just lucky enough to work for a company that I had insurance. But what if I had not had the insurance? This is what happens when we have an insurance, when we have a medical system that's based on profit.
That's right.
That's not based on people.
That's right.
We need Medicare for all, single-payer, universal health care in the United States. We have to have it. And why is it the richest country in the world does not have universal health care when a whole lot of other countries less wealthy than the United States have universal health care? Not to mention that all the other industrial nations have it. Not only do they have it, I have a friend. His name is Norman Richmond. He lives in Toronto, Canada. Norman called me last week. He was talking about when his son was born. He said, Larry, you want to know what this is a true story. Larry, you want to know what my hospital bill was? $0. And he said, you know what? And they gave me $7 for taxi cab fare to get home. Why don't we have that? Now, do you know that people have called for universal health care in the United States since the Theodore Roosevelt administration? Wow. Did you know that? Roosevelt, not Franklin. Teddy. The Rough Rider, Teddy. The turn of the century. That was one of the progressive reforms that people put forward. And then again, Truman wanted to implement a system of universal health care in the United States. Do you know why it failed? Because they would have had to federalize the hospitals. Once an institution receives $1 of federal money, it's federalized. And then what would have happened to those southern hospitals once they became federalized? They would have to operate according to the laws of the United States government and not the segregationist laws. Racism and segregation kept America from getting universal health care after World War II. See, there are consequences of racism. It's not just what happens to black people. Had we had universal, do you know how many millions of people would have benefited from that? Of all races? Everybody would have benefited. But the Dixiecrats told Truman that if you do this, you are not going to get reelected. But we need universal health care. The other reason I'm supporting Bernie Sanders is because the federal minimum wage is still $7.25 an hour. The federal minimum wage has not changed in this country for nearly 30 years. And if you extrapolate the annual income derived from $7.25 an hour, you will not make enough money to pay for a single bedroom apartment anywhere in the United States. So you know that's right. You can't pay rent on $7.25 an hour. You know what you can do for $7.25 an hour? You can get yourself back and forth to work. That's just about all you can do with $7.25 an hour. It's not a minimum wage. It is a slave wage. And the least we could do is double it and make it $15 an hour minimum wage in the United States. That's the least we can do. That's the least we can do. And let me tell you something. I ain't all that happy. I mean, we've had some victories in some states, including this state, where they want to move us to $15, ultimately to $15 an hour. But by the time, according to the schedules and the laws that have been passed, by the time we get to $15 an hour, you're going to need $25 an hour. What we really need in America is not a minimum wage. We need a living wage in the United States of America. And this is not a new idea. This is not a new idea. You know what we've been doing for the past half century? We've been trying to catch up to where we were in 1968. If you read Dr. King's book, he wrote 6 books: Measure of a Man, Stride Toward Freedom, Strength to Love, Why We Can't Wait, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, and Trumpet of Conscience. Those are the 6 books. And by the way, I challenge someone in this audience to stand up and tell me what school in Piscataway requires any of Dr. King's books to be read by its students. None. Not one. It doesn't make any sense to have a holiday if the children are not going to know the ideas for which Dr. King fought and died. We need to put those books on the curriculum, and I hope there's a school board member in here listening to me tonight. We need to put those books on the required reading, not the recommended reading. I went to Princeton University. I graduated from Princeton University. I graduated with a degree in politics. I did 2 years of graduate work toward a doctoral degree at Princeton University. Not one course required me to read one of Dr. King's books. Now, it was on some of the recommended reading lists, but it wasn't on any of the required reading lists. And if you read Dr. King's 5th book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, and you go to the appendix of the book, Dr. King actually had in that appendix a program for social and economic justice. And Dr. King called for an economic Bill of Rights. And one of those economic Bill of Rights was a living wage. Last Wednesday night, you know where I was? I was in Fanwood, New Jersey. You know what I was doing? I was helping someone get their things out of the apartment before they were evicted. The sheriff was coming the next day. How many of you have seen an eviction? Do you know why you don't see evictions on the television and in the movies? Because if the nation saw what happens during an eviction, there would be an uproar in this country. Wow. 4 years ago, there was a 75-year-old grandmother on Meade Street in Orange, New Jersey. You know why she was evicted? Because her mortgage company had been bought up by another mortgage company. And in the process of the acquisition, she was still sending her mortgage to the old mortgage company and not the new mortgage company. And the new mortgage company took her to court and got an eviction order from the judge. When an eviction order is given, a date is set. And on that date, the sheriff and his deputies come armed. And they also bring with them a contracted moving firm. The sheriff comes and the moving people come. They come to your apartment, they knock on your door, and if you're not willing to walk out on your own volition, they will drag you out. They will bring you out. And then the sheriff will call the moving people and they will bring your stuff, your couch and your chair and your bed and your dresser and your vanity and your TV and your belongings, and they will sit it on the sidewalk and they will leave you there, and they will get plywood and they will nail shut, don't just padlock, they will nail shut your door. They will nail the plywood to the windows so you can't get back into that house. More people lost their homes in the recession of 2008 than all the people combined from the turn of the century. This country is too rich to be putting people out of their homes, for homeless people to be sleeping on the street at night. We are too rich to allow that to happen. It is a disgrace and an abomination that we have veterans from Afghanistan and from Iraq sleeping on Raymond Boulevard in Newark, New Jersey. It is an abomination. And the woman that I helped last week was not unemployed. She had a job. She had 2 jobs, as a matter of fact. But her 2 jobs weren't enough to keep up with the rent. I'm going to tell you something. If people work 40 hours a week, they should make enough money to pay their rent and to feed themselves and clothe themselves and take care of their children. This is why I'm supporting Bernie Sanders. He's no Johnny-come-lately to these issues. Bernie Sanders has been saying the same thing for the last 40 years. And people say, well, why do you support a white man? Why weren't you supporting one of the black candidates? Listen, don't run that color game on me, because in the 21st century, I am not going to support someone just based on the color of their skin. I want to know the agenda that they're running on, and if they're not running on a people's agenda, I'm not going to support them. I don't care what the color of their skin is. Yes, I support that old white man, that old white Jewish man. I support him. And I'm not scared to stand up and say so. You got to stop being scared. See, this is one of the things that comes with becoming a senior citizen. I ain't scared no more. I don't care no more. I'm not worried about what you think about me. or what you gonna say about me, before I die, I want people to be able to say, he stood on truth. Whether people liked it or not, he stood on truth. And I want to stand on truth. And I want to try to live that kind of life before my life is over and I don't care anymore. I'm not here to be polite. I'm not here to give courtesies. I'm here to stand for truth. And I want to say, I want to stand on behalf of the working people of this country, on behalf of the poor people of this country, on behalf of the middle class people of this country. I want them to be able to say, he stood for truth and he stood for us. And that's why I'm supporting Bernie Sanders, because that's the kind of president we need. You all think about, well, he's too old. Look how many young, handsome presidents gave it to you the wrong way. He was young and handsome. He screwed you everywhere. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm in the church. I'm sorry. Please forgive me, Pastor. I'm sorry. I get carried away sometimes. I got to remember where I'm at. You know, I think of Jesus. You know, in the Bible, there were kings and there were prophets. The kings lived in the palace. They had beautiful robes. They had more than enough to eat. If they were like Solomon and David, they not only had wives, concubines, and slaves. They had wealth unimaginable. But the prophets, I never heard of a rich prophet. Can anybody name me a rich prophet? All the prophets seem to be poor. John wore goat skin, ate honey and locusts. I want to know how many women in here would marry a man that wore goat skin and ate honey and locusts. Nathan. David was himself supposed to be a prophet. He was a prophet and a king. But Nathan went and told David, you have sinned. John told Herod, you've sinned. Two kings were conferring to make war. One of the kings said to the other one, call Elijah, the Tishbite. The other king said, no, I don't want to call Elijah. Elijah never has anything good to say. Because Elijah saw the hypocrisy. Elijah saw the hypocrisy. Elijah saw, what did Amos say? Amos said, love mercy, do justice, and walk humbly with God. Jesus said, I leave you two new commandments. Just two. He said, on these hang all the law. Where's the Bible? Here's one right here. 1,500 pages. Jesus said, I leave you two new laws. Just two. And on these two hang all the laws of the prophet. To love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And what? To love your neighbor as you love yourself. And I don't understand it. Why all the churches, it's just so wonderful that we have a pastor here in a church here that would open itself up to the progressive Democrats of Piscataway. A pastor, you know, I was in Montgomery. I was in Birmingham. There was so much, people talk about the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. Do you know that there was so much bombing in Birmingham that they call it Birmingham? I went to the 16th Street Baptist Church. where the 4 little girls were killed. And if you stood in the pulpit of the 16th Street Baptist Church and you looked down the center aisle, you could see on one side it looked like the old church, and on the other side it looked like the new church. On a Sunday morning, some Klansmen came to that church and they stuck dynamite under the stairs of the church and blew the church up when the people were in there praying on a Sunday morning, killed 4 girls and seriously injured 21 others. What kind of people would go and blow up a church on a Sunday morning? But you know why they blew up that church? Because that church was a headquarters for the civil rights movement. Now, it's one thing to say you love Dr. King and the civil rights movement was great, but it's a whole nother thing to walk in the steps of Martin Luther King. And that's what we need today. We need ministers, men of God, women of God who are not fearless to walk in the steps of Dr. King and to stand up for the poor and the oppressed. That's what they were fighting for. That's where Dr. King was. He was in Memphis when he was killed. He wasn't in Memphis to get a $5 million contract to be a commentator on WABC. He wasn't in Memphis to give a big speech and to get some big honorarium for giving a big speech. He was in Memphis to help the sanitation workers who were making $1.50 a day, whose condition was so wretched that the signs they carried didn't say higher wages and shorter hours. They carried signs that said, I am a man, because they were not being treated like human beings. And I'm so glad we have a pastor in this church that's not afraid to stand up for the people and to open the doors of this church up so that people can come together and practice democracy. I don't want to talk too long. But I'm supporting Bernie Sanders because he's for Medicare for all, because he's for a $15 minimum wage, and because Dr. King wants a living wage. And I support Bernie Sanders because he wants to do something for our young people. You know who Bernie Sanders, that man, almost 80 years old, you know who his biggest supporters are? Young people. Young people are his biggest supporters. But why? Why do you think young people are the biggest supporters for Bernie Sanders? Well, I'm going to tell you something. I got 3 daughters. I got 3 daughters, Reverend Hampton. I got 3 daughters. They all grown now. Laini, Nia, and Imani. And they all Rutgers graduates. They're all graduates of Rutgers University. And I'm proud of my daughters. My oldest daughter is a nurse in 2 hospitals, Cooper and Camden and University in Philadelphia. My middle daughter, Nia, is a TV reporter for NBC in Boston. And my youngest daughter, Imani, has been working for the state of New Jersey, now going on her 2nd year. I'm proud of my daughters. Put my daughters through college. But you know what? I had to mortgage, refinance my house each time I sent a child to college. When I finally sold my house, I had no equity in the house because the cost of a college education is so high in this country. Even to get the children in the college, it costs so much money that you don't have enough, and then they have to take out loans. There are young people today graduating with $50,000, $60,000. I have even heard $100,000 in student loans just for undergraduate school. It doesn't even make sense to go to college. If they had stayed home and got a job at UPS or the post office, they would actually end up bringing home more money. Because if they're lucky to get a starter job at $40,000 a year, they might bring home $2,000 a month, but they're gonna pay the bank $1,200 a month. They don't have enough money to move out of mommy and daddy's house. They don't have enough money to buy a car and pay the rent. They don't have enough money to get their own starter home. This country is rich enough to provide a free college education to all our young people. That's why I'm supporting Bernie Sanders. And these young people are graduating as indentured servants. They gonna be there. I read yesterday, this woman said, I've been paying off my student loan for the past 20 years, and my payment is bigger today than it was when I started. That's crazy that they have financialized higher education. In my lifetime, and in your lifetime, I can remember, this is not a foreign concept. CCNY was free at one time up until the 1960s. There were free colleges in the United States. But somebody got the bright idea to financialize and make this a profit-making center. And one of those persons, Betsy DeVos, now sits as the Secretary of Education. She does not need to be the Secretary of Education if she's profiting from a lot of these run-of-the-mill student loan program schools that are going on all around this country. College should be free. And in 2008, these banks almost took down the country. But nobody went to jail for these, what was that big word they used? Derivatives. And financial instruments. They couldn't even put a name on it. But we know this, it wreaked havoc on the system. The whole system almost, do you remember for a minute, can anybody be a witness for me here? For a minute, even Barack Obama was saying we might have to nationalize the banks. Anybody remember that?
I remember.
You remember that, don't you? All of a sudden, socialism didn't seem so far away, did it? And you had what's the black guy that was the head of, was it the head of Chase? Or American Express? Was saying that might not be a bad idea because they wanted to be bailed out. And we did bail them out with a bill. Usually when the people need something, the bill is like 500 pages. You know, you need an increase in food stamps. You got to have 500 pages, 50 hearings, different committees have to hear. You got to go down there, you got to march, you got to protest just to keep them from cutting food stamps. But to bail out the banks to the tune of more than $1 trillion, the bill was 12 pages long. I saw the bill. I'm not talking about what somebody told me or I heard on television. 12 pages long. We bailed out the banks, and then them mothers, then them people turned around and gave themselves bonuses and pay increases and had big parties. If we could bail out the banks, we can bail out our young people and erase those student debts so they are not debt slaves for the rest of their lives. I used to go to South 17th Street School. And when I went to school in the fall, well, every day from the time that I was in the second grade, my mother sent me to school by myself. Any of y'all went to school by yourself and your kids? It's different now, ain't it? You wouldn't send your second grader to school by themselves now. And I lived on 12th Street, and my school was South 17th Street School on South 17th Street, but I had to walk through West Side Park to get to the school. My mother would stand on the porch with me, and when a group of kids came by, she said, okay, Larry, go walk with them to school. And we went to school, and I came home, and my mother was never worried whether or not I was going to come back alive. But I can remember walking through the park, Reverend. I'd look up, and in the fall, I would see flocks of birds every day. Like we'd be in science class, and they'd be teaching us that the birds fly south for the winter. And I'd be walking around, and I'd be like, yeah, the birds are flying south for the winter, right? Every day. How often do you see birds flying south now? I mean, we had 70-degree days this month. We've had the warmest winters ever recorded since we started recording them. The birds you don't see flying anymore. The air is polluted. I remember you watched the news to get the weather report to see if it was going to rain or snow, not to see what the air quality was. The air is poison. We had a park. We had in West Side Park, we had a lake. When my father died when I was 4, my mother moved back home with her parents. My grandfather would take me to West Side Park. We could catch the fish in the lake and eat it. Oh, wow. Yes, in 1957. Don't do it. No, ain't even a lake. Not only don't do it, that lake was so polluted that they drained it and filled it in. And somebody would have to take you and show you where the lake was in West Side Park in Newark. The airs. My mother used to make Kool-Aid. She would get some ice out the freezer, put it in the pitcher, and then turn the faucet on and put the water in the pitcher. And then put the Kool-Aid and the lemons, and it was good. You can't drink water out your faucet no more. Whole cities give out water filters because the water is polluted. We have in our cities now Superfund sites. You know some of the most deadly Superfund sites in the country are right here in New Jersey. Do you know that in Newark, there were factories in the East Ward of Newark that made dioxin? Dioxin that was used in Agent Orange, used in Vietnam. But see, you can't do evil to people and then get away from evil being done to you. So now all that, where that land was, where those factories were, that land is poison. And the children have higher rates of cancer and other diseases because the land is poison. We face an existential crisis. I used to hear that word, existential, and I looked it up, and the root is existence. The very existence of humanity is in the balance now. And the outcome is not certain at all. This is why we must break our dependence on fossil fuels and implement a Green New Deal in the United States of America. And that's why I'm supporting Bernie Sanders, because he supports a Green New Deal. And lastly, I support Bernie. I support his whole platform. But I can't do the whole thing tonight. But lastly, one of the reasons I support Bernie Sanders is because, you know, when I was a kid, they had a lot of World War II movies on. Was it the something of Iwo Jima? What was it? The Sands of Iwo Jima. Yes. And Midway. John Wayne. And I saw all these movies about World War II. I like the TV movie, the TV series Rat Patrol. Anybody remember Rat Patrol? When they come flying over that sand dune in that Jeep, I used to love that. You know how long we were in World War II? 5 years. 5 years. Supposed to be the war to end all wars? 5 years. We have been in Afghanistan and in Iraq for 19 years. It's time to end the wars and bring the troops home. That's why I support Bernie Sanders, because he wants to end these wars and bring these young people home, men and women. So that's why I'm supporting Bernie Sanders. And I'm here tonight to ask you, I just heard this for the first time. I didn't think about this before I got here, but I heard you have an endorsement process.
We did.
So I hope that there will be a point where you consider who you will endorse for president, and I would urge you to vote for Bernie Sanders for president of the United States. I believe that he will be a great president. I believe that he will be the greatest president since FDR. Because if he implements just one of those things, just one, he will be in the history books for as long as there's a United States. He will be the president that brought universal health care. He could be the president to end student debt. He could bring the president to usher in a living wage. And then I would ask you to make another consideration, to consider endorsing a street corner troublemaking agitator named Larry Hamm for the U.S. Senate. Let me just end with this. How did I come to run for the U.S. Senate? One of the reasons I'm running for the U.S. Senate is because I want to do everything in my power to make sure that Bernie Sanders wins the New Jersey Democratic primary. And one of the ways to do that is to have candidates running for offices who are running on the platform like his, who align their campaign with his, and who will in fact bring their constituencies not only to vote for themselves, but to vote for Bernie Sanders also. And I'm running for U.S. Senate because not only to help Bernie win, but if Bernie gets elected, do you know we're going to have to fight harder to get the agenda through than we did to get him elected? You think it's going to be over if we elect Bernie Sanders? They're going to be doing everything in their power to stop the implementation. But there's one thing we have to do to facilitate that implementation. We have to knock out that Republican majority in the U.S. Senate. We got to knock them out. We got to flip the Senate. You see what undergirds the Trump administration? The Senate. It's not the House, it's the Senate. It's the Senate, and I fear, because the worst is yet to come, it will be this right-wing Supreme Court. Because I feel that if we defeat Donald Trump at the ballot box, and he must be defeated, let's make no bones about that. I know I got a lot of my left-wing friends in here. I consider myself on the left, and yes, it is the system that has to be changed. There's no disagreement on that. We are not going to eliminate poverty as long as we have a capitalist system. It's not going to happen. Capitalism makes poverty. It's not an aberration or an accident. It's a dialectic. You cannot have rich and not have poor. And those countries that have managed to minimize or even eradicate poverty, or at least abject poverty in their countries, don't have the kind of capitalist system we have. Sweden and Denmark and Norway, yes, they are capitalist, but they also characterize themselves as social democratic, which means that they use government to, in fact, raise the standard of living of the people of their countries. And the people, according to the United Nations, who are the happiest in the world are the people in Norway, and followed by the other Scandinavian countries. I remember when I was a little boy, when my father passed away, I was 4 years old. We went to stay with my mother's parents, my grandparents. It was my grandfather, Claude Cobb, his wife, Stella, her sister, Joan, and my cousin Ralph, who had come up from down south to live with us. So I had like 5 parents, right? But Joan, my grandmother's sister, was a live-in domestic. Do y'all know what a live-in domestic is? Was a live-in domestic. And she worked for a rich white family named the Purses in New York. She would go and stay with them Monday through Friday and then come back home on the weekends. Now, I figured that the Purses were charitable people because they would always send stuff to us with Joan. Clothes, records. I was probably the only black kid on 12th Street that had Joan Baez records. I'm not making this up. But they sent another record in 1965. And that title of that record was Ron was in the struggle for freedom and human dignity. Yes. And it was the recording that Martin Luther King made at the Armory in New York City after he returned from Oslo, Norway, receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, I was a little boy then. Now, you know, now they got iPods and iPhones, and they don't know what a 45 is, do they? But I had one of them little record players. Remember the fold-up kind record players? You unfold the speakers, you carry it like a briefcase. I unfold my record player and I put this record on, and I had never heard a black man talk like this. I had never heard a man, black or white, talk like Dr. King. I mean, for me as a child, it was like I was hearing the voice of God. And Dr. King always sounded so much older than he really was. He was only 39 when he was killed. He was a young man when he was killed. But I had never heard. I've been to churches and I heard preaching and I heard good preaching. But I ain't heard nobody speak like him. Dr. King recited poetry on that record. The first time I had ever heard a man recite poetry. I think he recited Langston Hughes. Fleecy locks and black complexions cannot forfeit nature's claim. Skin may differ, but affection dwells in black and white the same. If I were so tall as to reach the stars, or to grasp the ocean into span, I must be measured by my soul. The mind is the standard of the man. I heard that in 1966, and I never forgot it. Never forgot it. But you know what else I heard on that record in 1966? I heard Dr. King say that there was a surplus of wheat and corn in America that year. And that there was a debate in Congress on what to do with this surplus. You know what Dr. King said? He said, I know where we can store this food. We can store it in the stomachs of the children that go to bed hungry at night in the United States of America. And on that same record, in his own words, Dr. King was critical, I quote, of our monopolistic system of capitalism. Those are his words. monopolistic system of capitalism. And I tell you, brothers and sisters, as I sit down, we can work for reforms and we must achieve those reforms, but we won't get to where we need to get to. We won't get to what Dr. King called the beloved community. We won't get to a national commonwealth. We won't get to the city on the hill unless we do as Dr. King says in the chapter titled The World House. And where we go from here, Community of Chaos, Dr. King says, we must have a radical transformation of our socio-economic system. We must have a radical redistribution of power and wealth in our country. In our country today, 3 men, 3. The nation has 330 million people. 3 men have more wealth than 165 million. There are 7.9 billion people in the world. 180 men hold more wealth in the world than 3.5 billion people. That is something that cannot be ignored. We would ignore that at our own peril. Because when you look at history and you look at societies that had this kind of inequality, it was a sign along the road to instability and revolution. So while we work to elect the people we want to elect and to implement the reforms we want to implement, we also have to think about changing this system and building a better world. I know it can be done. I'm an American. I was born in this country, and I love my country. I don't want to live nowhere else. And I know some of my friends, they would really get on me if they heard me talking like this. I love my country. But I do. I don't want to live nowhere else. America is a great nation, but it can be a greater nation. The only thing we're #1 in the world right now is the sale of weapons to other countries. In all other indicators, health, education, employment, happiness of its citizens, we are like 32nd, 25th. That's not where we should be. So I charge you who are here tonight to recommit yourselves to this struggle. I know it's a hard struggle. It's a struggle without any rewards. I was telling Sheila on the way down here, I said, I don't push my children to be activists. If they're going to be activists, they're going to make that decision on their own. Because this is a hard life without much reward. But we fight because it's right. We fight. Everybody, I pity the person who has never had the sublime moment of conscience. You know what I'm talking about? When you make a decision and you know the consequence of that decision is not going to result in your comfort or your security. But you know more than physical comfort or security is the peace within that comes for standing what is right. I hope you'll have that in your lifetime. Thank you very much, brothers and sisters. Power to the people.